their story is our story. And it's not so much meant for us as it's meant for other people. And I had put in motion before meeting him how I was going to kill him and what I was going to do to him. I went in my bedroom and I got my gun and I went and picked out the best looking oak tree that there could be for blowing one's brains out. I was hearing that I was a worthless piece of junk and I didn't deserve to be a husband, I didn't deserve to be a father, and mostly I didn't deserve to live. It's been about, I guess 3 years or so since I first sat here and shared my stuff. And most of you that have been through 101 have heard some or parts of it. But the cool thing is our story is our story. And it's not so much meant for us as it's meant for other people. And that's kind of what we're all about in this organization that we call Celebrating Freedom. We're doing life together. And we figured out that for most of us, it's necessary to exchange relationship and relationships that we formed with things that little s has convinced us are important to us. And I'll stop here and preface. I refer to Satan as little s. I refuse to say his name. And I will not say it again. Because I allowed him for many years of my life to have control of this. And this, and that control caused me to make decisions and experience consequences from those decisions for which I am deeply regretful and sorry. Yet I wouldn't change a thing. Which is the cool thing about freedom. And so my desire tonight is to share some of my stuff so that we can all know that we don't have to remain in the closets with our junk, that it deserves to be flushed down the toilets of eternity and reside with little s forever. So God has just about finished chapter 51 in my life. Begin at March the 26th, chapter 52 will begin. And so I want to share with you what I kind of have titled, if you will, this portion of my life. And it is, God is a squirrel and I'm a nut. And you'll tie into that a little bit as I go. I am originally from a part of the country, Northern Virginia, called Fredericksburg. Anybody here heard of that? If you're a history buff, especially Civil War, it's near and dear to your heart. The Battle of Fredericksburg, the Battle of Spotsylvania, the Battle of Chancellorsville used to be a really, really neat bedroom community. The first 40 years of my life were lived there. Now I refer to it as the closest thing to hell on earth. Because it's nothing but pavement and cars and people and nobody smiles. And it is by God's grace that I am here today based on the experiences that I had in Fredericksburg. Now, I was an only child. My mother and my father were both factory workers. My dad had a third grade education. He could not read, he could not write. But he was my best friend. And so because of my situation and being an only child, I developed the loner attitude and background very quickly. And my best friends were me, myself, and I. And so throughout elementary school, middle school, and high school, I was the red-headed, buck-toothed, fair-skinned, freckle-faced, thick glasses dude. I was the guy that people shoved in the closet or in the locker, shut the door, and that's where I stayed until somebody was kind enough to let me out. And so from that, I became very attached and very good at the 3D motion picture that, God developed 3D well before we ever did. And it's in our heads. And so I developed the ability to do bad things to people in here. And so that went through not only elementary school and middle school and high school, but it affected my interaction with people. In fact, I never dated throughout high school whatsoever. And it wasn't until my senior year of high school that anybody showed me any attention. And so I made an assumption based on that the individual who showed me attention must have been the right person for me. And so at the age of 20, and she being at the age of 18, we got married. And about 5 years later, our daughter was born, Lauren Ashley, Christmas Day, 1987. She was really a tremendous gift from that relationship, along with other things. Let me stop here and say this. Part of my story is relating to the person who is now my ex-wife. And what I share is not to bash an ex-wife, because we guys in relationships, especially marriage relationships, are as much responsible for the success and perhaps the failure of those. And some of us are in that club, I'm sure, here tonight. And so we got married, and Lauren was born. Things were pretty good between my ex now and myself for until about 1998. We were married for 17 years, together a total of 19. In 1998, I discovered by way of email that she was having an affair with the pastor at our church. Now, I am Southern Baptist by denomination, and I don't rock the world of denominations in any way, and will not sit here and tell you that. I have some issues with legalistic folk, and that will be brought out a little bit later on in my sharing. But from 1998 until about the year 2000, this affair was on again and off again and on again and off again. And it really did rock my world. I had not seen that coming, as most of us who have experienced a relational breakdown would say amen. But, things seemed to get better, and then things seemed to get worse. And I was pretty heavy into softball at that time. And so myself and this pastor had several meetings at several of the Civil War battlefields, which was my plan and my intent. And I had put in motion, before meeting him, how I was going to kill him and what I was going to do to him and the excuses that I was going to make and the reasons for those excuses. But it was by providential direction, I suppose, that those events did not occur. And along about 2000, things seemed to be going pretty well for this individual and myself. And in April of 2000, she went on a business trip with a guy that she worked with. And that she left on a Sunday, came back to the house on a Thursday. And then the following Sunday, she left to be not for the pastor, but for the guy that she went on the business trip with. And so at that point, our daughter was about 12 years old. And after a week of her mother and I being separated, Lauren asked me, she said, "Dad, would you promise me not to get involved with another woman immediately?" And it was that promise that I made that day that little S used to convince me that buying a porn tape would be the answer to all of my needs. So that night I went to the video store, never ever imagined myself doing that, and walked in that back room and bought my first videotape. And it was that night that I became addicted, hook, line, sinker, ship, ocean to pornography. Now, I'd also been very much an enjoyer of alcohol. But when you have one addiction as those of us who are in that same majority know, it tends to enjoy rubbing shoulders with a second. And so alcohol and pornography became very real to me. And it didn't take very long before it consumed me. Morning, noon, night, I was taking junk to work. And I was hearing these voices, if you will, that I was honoring my daughter's request of not becoming involved with another woman by my involvement in pornography. And at the same time, I was hearing that I was a worthless piece of junk. And I didn't deserve to be a husband. I didn't deserve to be a father. And mostly, I didn't deserve to live. And those thoughts and those very real voices to me became consuming and overwhelming, to the point in July of 2000, it was a really hot summer day, beautiful summer day, but a really hot summer day. And my assistant came into the office at noon, and I simply told her that I had to leave. And so I went home. I lived on 5 acres of land with a house smack dab in the middle of it. And I went in my bedroom, and I got my gun, and I went and picked out the best-looking oak tree that there could be for blowing one's brains out. And I took a seat beside that oak tree and curled my legs up into my chest and was completely convinced that the world, my world, that my 12-year-old daughter, and that my mom and my dad would be absolutely better off if I pulled the trigger. And so I closed my eyes and I put the gun to my head and I began to squeeze. And the next thing I know, I hear the leaves rustle at the end of my feet. And so I open my eyes and there's a squirrel sitting at the end of my feet looking at me. Now, I never have been a hunter. I've done bad things to animals, for which I'm not proud. But I typically know that, the wild animals and human beings tend not to buddy up too well. And so it kind of freaked me out, that this squirrel was just sitting here looking at me and I was staring at it. And it dawned on me at that moment that it was as if my mom was watching when I was going to blow my brains out that day. Now, I don't know how long this relational thing between this squirrel and I occurred, but I know this: he didn't blink and he didn't run off and I didn't shoot myself. So, I say and I tell people he must have thought he hit the mother lode of nuts that day. So I am convinced that God was a squirrel for me that day. And I am so convinced that in 2011, Nate Music, who usually is here, his wife drew a squirrel holding my heart. And I had that tattooed on my chest. And that tattoo on my chest, I view every morning when I get out of the shower. And it reminds me that God had a different plan for me that day. And I've learned a lot since then. In fact, I had 2 tattoos that day done. Because I dislike little s so much, I had one tattooed on my back, which is a cross with the face of Jesus in it. So that I could always look back, or have Jesus looking back, covering my back and saying, ha, 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 you lose, little s. Because for so many moments and months and years of my life, he won more battles than he lost. But I take great pride and enjoyment now being able to say, ha, 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 you lose. Now, things didn't change a whole lot for me. The pornography didn't stop. In fact, it really didn't stop until I moved here. But things didn't get better between my now ex-wife and myself either. I learned, though, from that event, one of the things I learned is God is forward thinking. And what I mean by that is, we can look at the Bible from the book of Genesis to the book of Revelation. And for the most part, it is about God's redemptive plan for humanity, for individuals, for tribes, for nations. His desire to restore relationship with people and folks who have substituted that relationship with other stuff. And so I've learned that is very much true in my life. Now, I shared with you about my mom and my dad. My mom was a 35-year cancer patient. From the time that I was 8 years old, which is the age that I accepted Christ as my Savior, from the time I was 8 years old, my mom dealt with cancer. And as a result of that, I tend to tease, she had more stuff removed than she had left. But my relationship with her was crap. Really because of me. And during my marriage, my ex-wife couldn't stand her. So I would make choices to go for 9 months and never talk to her, and she lived 10 miles from me. Even though she would go through cancer treatments and chemo and radiation and surgeries, I made those choices. And so had I blown my brains out that July day, I would have not had 9 months to restore a relationship because she died March of 2001. And so God has given me the ability to remember those 9 months in a very strong and powerful way. And I spent every day with her. God is forward thinking. Now, during that time frame, remember I promised my daughter that I would not get involved with another woman, and I didn't. In fact, at one time, probably during one of my pornography highs, I said, God, if there's somebody out there, you're going to have to drop them in my lap. January the 31st, 2001, he did just that. Denise. And I refer to her as the closest thing to an angel on earth. Because 2 months after she and I met, my mom died. And a few months before my mom died, she had asked me, she said, Rusty, would you promise me to take care of your dad if something happens to me? Now, my dad, I told you, he couldn't read or he couldn't write. Simple guy. Enjoyed the simplest, smallest things in life. And he was my best friend. And so he continued to care for my mom even after her death. It's funny. We would go to the gravesite, and my mom's grave would be the only one that was green and lush. Every day he would take a 5-gallon bucket of water and water her grave and fertilize it and grass seed it and trim it. See, for 15 years of my mom's life, he took care of her every day, and he continued to do that. It was in his blood. It was who he was. But about a year or so after she died, he came down with this thing called dementia. And I'd never seen that side of my dad before. It took some convincing to get him to move in with me. But he finally did, and the cool thing is that Denise was there to see us through that time frame too of adjustment and fun times. But in July of 2003, he was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. And within 3 or 4 months, he was dead. God is forward thinking. Denise was there to help me through that too. Now, the cool thing about Denise is she's originally from a place called Bristol, Tennessee. And I was a huge race fan, a big Earnhardt fan, and I knew about Bristol Raceway. But of course, I lived close to Richmond International Raceway and spent a lot of time there. And so she invited me to come to Bristol, and I've been here ever since. We are motorcyclists and enjoy that, and it's safer, believe it or not, to ride here than it is up in that Fredericksburg area. And so we moved here in 2003, a week before my dad passed away. And in moving here, we had kind of given up on God. At least I had. My addiction to porn was still very, very, very valid, and I enjoyed drinking. And anger was an issue that I had too. But Denise's involvement in my life had kind of quelled that some. And after settling in here, we decided it was probably time for us to get involved with a church of some sort. And being Southern Baptist by denomination, guess what? That's where we saw it, and that's where we ended up, at a Southern Baptist church in Bristol. And we kind of fit in pretty well there for a while. We wore leather, and I got the tattoos and the earring, and used to frustrate my mom because I'd wear shorts to work or to church, and she said that's not proper. And I was the rebel too. If you say no, I'll do yes. Any of you realize what I'm talking about? And sometimes that doesn't do good in an environment, especially a legalistic one. So we became involved very heavily in this church, and our chaplains with Raceway Ministries, and for many years enjoyed spending a couple of weeks a year at the racetrack, one of the local campgrounds, because believe it or not, folks spend a lot of money in camping and in race tickets and never make it to the race. And based on our past histories of alcohol and porn, in my case, I had the uncanny ability to connect, especially with guys, because that happens a lot in that environment. And so, God is forward thinking in that He puts us in the shoulder rubbing environment of folks who kind of are just like us, kind of like what CF is all about, really. And things were going pretty good in that environment for a while, and until one Wednesday night, the pastor called Denise and I into his office and shut the door, and his wife was in there too. And he proceeded to tell us that we were a detriment to the growth of the church and could no longer serve in any leadership capacity. Well, if I may say, hell flew into me that night. And it was as if all of those vivid memories and conversations and feelings and experiences from way back when welled up within a matter of seconds. But my plans in that previous pastor life of beating him to death with softball bats was way since gone. I was now a concealed carry permit holder, and I had my Glock 9mm on my side, and I flicked the strap, and I came within a cat's hair blowing his brains out that night. And it scared me. It really scared me. And I realized that anger was a huge issue for me. Not only porn, but anger and alcohol. It was now a threesome. And so Denise and I hung around that place for a while, and they changed locks so we couldn't get in. And our whole small group Bible study was kind of ousted from the church. And the neat thing is, there was a guy in our small group who was part of the Haven of Rest. And he was graduating and had invited Denise and I to come to his graduation. And it was at a place called Celebration Church, at a ministry called Celebrating Freedom. And so Denise and I said, sure, we'll come to your graduation and then beat feed it. So we showed up that Thursday night, and we sat through his graduation here. And we were ready just to pack it up and go home, you know. And then Roger gets up and begins to share what's coming up. And that night they were starting a DVD study on anger. God is forward thinking. Now, Denise and I have been here ever since. This place, this environment, the folks that we rub shoulders with now on a weekly basis have been exactly what she and I needed for healing. And so I'm going to tout celebrating freedom a little bit. Because what we experience in this environment is just that, healing. And for those that come through the door who desire to be fixed, you know, I say dogs get fixed. One minute they can, the next minute they can't. But the God relationship, the restoring, the replacing the relationships that we have, in my instance with pornography and alcohol and anger, with that God relationship, requires time and healing. And the cool thing is, God's whole desire for that to occur is in community. And what better community than the folks that I call my family here? Is this the right place for everybody? I don't know. Is God the right relationship for everybody? Absolutely. Without question. Now, I've learned a lot even since being in this environment. Not only is God forward thinking, and you know, folks have a hard time, like I said, getting that in the Bible if that's not a Bible thing for you. So I tend to tell people, if you have a hard time with that concept, look at our bodies. You know, our bodies are jointed to move forward. Yes? Yes. Very easy for us to walk from point A to point B. The friends in our 101 class, I will share, if you have a hard time grasping that, then walk backwards to your car. It would require a lot of thought. The only thing God put on our backside is our tailpipe. And that's to get rid of stuff that's no longer useful to us. God is forward thinking. So, you know, we all have our stuff, we all have our things. We all have our stories. And the neat thing is to see folks who use their stories to benefit other people. And that's what we're all about in this environment here. I want to share something with you that I enjoy reading some of Sarah Young's stuff just about every day for a devotion. And I'm reading every day from Jesus Lives, which is a cool one. But in here is one that I just had to share with you tonight. And so if you'll bear with me reading to you. It says, freedom in Him. Come to me when you are hurting, and I will share your pain. Come to me when you are joyful, and I will share your joy, multiplying it many times over. I invite you to come to me just as you are, no matter what condition you're in. You don't have to clean up your act first, since I already know the worst about you. When you're hurting, you want to be with someone who understands you without condemning you. When you're happy, you delight in being with someone who loves you enough to celebrate with you. I understand you compassionately and love you exuberantly. So bring more and more of yourself to me. Most people are selective about which parts of themselves they share with me. Some hesitate to bring me the traits they consider shameful. Others are so used to living with painful feelings, loneliness, fear, guilt, that it never occurs to them to ask for help in dealing with their struggles that they forget I'm even here. There are hurting parts of you that I desire to heal. However, some of them have been with you so long that you consider them part of your identity. You carry them with you wherever you go with little awareness. On occasion, when you have brought some damaged portion of yourself to me, I have helped you walk in newfound freedom. However, you are so addicted to certain painful patterns that you cannot easily break free from them. Only repeatedly exposing them to my healing presence will bring you long-term freedom. When that happens, you will be released to experience joy in much fuller measure. I will share your joy and multiply it many times over. This is the freedom experience, and what celebrating freedom is absolutely all about. In printed form, it is what we do. It is what we enjoy. And if you'll allow me to be so bold to say, and I'm not ashamed at all to refer to myself as someone like a misfit, because aside from that relationship with Christ, I am misfit for heaven. But I have a feeling that God has a special place for us misfit toys. I want to share with you a little bit, though, towards the end about my father. And I like to leave him to the last. I told you he couldn't read or write, and when Mom died, we had to do things like put masking tape on the microwave and number 1, 2, and 3 so he'd know which sequence to push the buttons. And if I could be half the man that he was, I'll be a successful man. But my father, he used to do and use and work with a lot of old tools. And Denise and I kept most of them when we moved here. And I like to do my own automotive work, and I like to work on, my own motorcycle, and I intentionally use his tools. I just feel very close to him when I do that. This I know. I can take one of those 50-year-old Craftsman wrenches that's dirty and nasty, and I can take one of his half-inch wrenches and put on a half-inch nut, and it'll turn it every time. Every time. Now, I can go to Sears and I can buy a brand spanking new half-inch wrench, and it'll turn that same nut every time. I have this concept in my mind that God has got this huge Craftsman toolbox, and they're full of dirty, nasty wrenches. You and me. Sometimes I'm the wrench, sometimes you're the nut. Sometimes you're the wrench, and sometimes I'm the nut. We turn each other in ways that support each other to get through this thing called life. So, that's kind of my thing in a nutshell, if you will. And the other thing I know about God is He's got a kitchen that's full of cast iron skillets, and most of them have my face printed in them. One of the last questions that Denise and I tend to ask people in 101 is, if you could change anything, would you? And overwhelmingly, people say no, which in and of itself, in my view, is a you lose little s. Because if I could go back and change things, I don't know where I'd be. I don't know what I'd miss. And so rather than looking backwards, I just as soon ride the wave of God is forward thinking and see what He has in store. Because, a lot of us don't just have emotional things, the porn thing. A lot of us have scars that we look at and see every day. Roger, if you don't mind me saying, the scar on his chest. The cool thing about the relationship between God and us is one day these bodies that we have are going to be gone and it's all going to be new. And so, the emotional scars, the baggage that has calloused us, forget that junk. It'll be in the darkness with little s forever and ever and ever. So, is there hope? Yes. Is this the place? Yes. Is God the answer? Yes. And hopefully, hopefully we can do something simple, and that is just make God smile. Just make God smile. I love you. I love you for who you are and what you represent. And the cool thing is, the person that God sees when you look in the mirror is the person that He loves, regardless of the scar or the callousness. And so take that to the bank with you tonight. Thank you for participating in this sharing time. And lastly, let me say this. As important as the leadership and the people of Celebrating Freedom are, what really makes this tick is the people you see right here. You. So if anybody deserves to have the pat on the back, it is you. For being real, for being transparent, for providing safety for folks who are very much hurting, for providing an environment where folks can walk through the door and not be condemned or feel ashamed. And lastly, where little s is not welcome, because he loses.